Hi everybody, so the lesson that I'm going to model for you all today would be an activity that follows up a discussion of food webs and food change, how they're different, and how the energy flows throughout all of those. So the students would have already had the background knowledge of the definitions of a food chain and a food web, as well as things like energy pyramid. They know the difference between producers and consumers as well. So the objectives here would be for students to be able to take an organism and identify where it belongs within our food web, as well as taking a look at our food web and deciding how does the energy flow between the organisms in the actual food web itself. So as the students would come in the room, they would all find one of these note cards sitting face down on their desk. Their instructions would be to not touch the note card, not flip it over, until instructed to do so, and then they should start getting ready to work on their bell ringer, which is how is a food chain different from a food web. This will just get them thinking about the things that we've been talking about this week and hopefully get their brains moving in the right direction for the activity we're about to do. So from there, I'll begin to actually show you what this lesson would look like. Okay everybody, it's time to put your bell ringers away and you can finally flip over those note cards you've all been wondering about. If you look at those note cards you have in front of you, you'll see that each of you has a different living organism. What are those called again? Right, those are all biotic because they're all living. Just make sure you remember your vocabulary. And so then what I would like you to do is take a look at that organism you have in your hand. Our goal for this lesson today is to see how does your organism fall into a food web, and then how can we identify how energy flows throughout this food web. So I want you to take a look. Try to think about, are you a producer or are you a consumer? If you're a consumer, what level of a consumer do you think you are? Or do you think you are a primary consumer, or do you think you're a tertiary consumer, way up at the top? A predator, not prey. So take a minute, 1 minute, think to yourself, am I a producer or am I a consumer? Once they're done thinking, it would be a think, pair, share model. So now they've thought. Now it would be time to take a look at the person sitting next to you, have them tell you what their organism is, what they think they're identified as, and you share what your organism is and what you think you've identified as, and double check each other. Have a conversation. Am I right? Maybe I think that I'm higher up in the food chain than I really am. Talk about that. Okay, now that you've had a minute to talk about your discussion, I'm going to do it all to take a look up here. What I want from all of you is to look at the note cards you have in your hand, take a look at your organism. Who thinks they have the very first piece to our food web for us today? Now hopefully the person with the sun would raise their hand because, as we've discussed earlier in class, you cannot possibly have any sort of food web or food chain without the sun itself. So the person with the sun, okay, you can bring your note card up. They would bring their note card up. And we're going to tape it to the board right here. The sun is always the center, even though it's not placed in the center, of our food web. Without it, we can't get energy, right? And we cannot possibly then continue to exist. Our food web cannot grow. So now that we have the sun, I want you to raise your hand if you think you had a producer. And before you all come up and bring them to the board, can anybody tell me what a producer is? Remind us all, what is a producer? Very good. A producer is any organism that gets its energy directly from the sun. And we know they use the process of photosynthesis. Very good. So we're looking for plants, right? We sometimes forget about plants when we say organism, but they're definitely living organisms as well, and they're very essential parts to our food web. So one person, hold up your card if you think you have a producer. Very good, that's awesome. Can you bring up the shrub and bring it up here, please? So then we would tape our shrub to. So I'm going to put our shrub right here. And then Who else thinks they have a producer? Can make their energy directly from the sun? Grass. Grass is awesome. Bring up grass, and we will also tape grass on the board. We're going to put grass right in the middle, right over our friend the sun. Awesome. And there's one other producer. Who thinks they have this one other producer? You are correct. It would be the tree. So the tree also goes on the board. Okay, now here's one of our key objectives. Don't forget, it's not only can we put our organisms onto our food web, it's can we identify how that energy flows through our food web. Does the energy go from the grass to the sun? Hopefully they would say no. They would say the energy flows from the sun to the grass. So we would draw our arrows from the sun to the grass. And then the same with the sun to the shrub and the sun to the tree. So we draw our arrows in the direction that energy flows, and this has created the first level of our food web. Awesome. Now we would continue. So again, if you think you have a primary consumer, one that eats the producers, go ahead and raise your hand. If you are holding the impala, you are most definitely correct. The impala actually eats our shrubs and it eats the grass. You are also correct if you are holding the mouse, that eats the grass, and the grasshopper. So obviously if I had students in the class, I would be asking them to bring these up and we would be placing them on the board together. So the mouse and the grasshopper. And then finally, even though their size, you might not think it, primary consumers also include our rhino and our giraffe. Awesome. Because they eat the trees. So can somebody tell me how the energy might flow in this layer of the web? Very good. From our producers to our consumers. So impalas eat shrubs. They also eat the grass. Mice eat the grass, grasshoppers eat the grass, and rhinos and giraffes both eat the very good trees. Okay, so the way this will work is now I'd like to know if you think you are a secondary consumer, a consumer that actually eats. So if you think you're a secondary consumer and you said caracal, you're exactly correct. You are also correct if you say snake, which eats the caracal, as well as the fiscal shrike. That's the bird that eats the grasshopper. Awesome job with that one. Finally, we have our African skunk, which eats the fiscal shrike. And we have the baboon as well. Good. So I will draw our arrows. Probably at this point, if I had students in this lesson with me, I would be asking them to come up and draw the arrows. But so the caracal eats the mouse, the snake eats the caracal, the baboon eats the snake, the baboon also eats the grasshopper. There we go, just like that. And then we get to the African skunk. So finally, we have one last level that we need to talk about, and those are our tertiary or quaternary, depending on which model we would be using, consumers. These are our highest level. Would you consider these predators or prey? You're exactly right if you say predators. So if you have one of these blue cards in your hand, you are a predator. You are very high up in our food chain, on our food web here. You're right, so the leopard we'll put right here. The vulture we'll actually put up here in the middle. We attached a special name to a bird like a vulture. Does anybody remember that? You are correct, we talked about scavengers. And what is the scavenger again? You're right, they feed on the bodies of dead organisms, and that's why the vulture is actually so high up on the food chain, because it can feed on other larger organisms, even like a leopard. So finally, our energy flows from the baboon to the leopard, and actually from the leopard to the vulture, from the African skunk to the vulture, and then from the giraffe and the rhino to the lion. Dummy. What would happen if we take one of these organisms out of our food web? Pick one. Why don't we pick one? Why don't we say the snake is gone? Okay, so if the snake is gone, does that baboon have enough to eat? No, okay, so we have to get rid of that. Okay, so now does the leopard have something to eat? You're right, they don't have their food, right? So now our higher level consumers are gone. What about our lower levels? Is there anyone to eat the charcoal anymore? No, so there's probably more of them. So they need to eat more mice and more grass. And then eventually what's going to happen is we have to eat more and more and more. You're right, they're going to run out. So the food web and the food chain is a very delicate balance that you have to be really careful about. And that's why every single piece is important that it stays in place, which is why we care so much about things like extinction. Awesome. Okay, so now for the very end of the lesson, I would like you to take out a piece of notebook paper, piece of scratch paper. This will be your exit ticket out the door. And I want you to write down exactly what would happen if we take one organism out of our food web. Tell me two effects, 1, 2, that would occur if we removed an organism from our food web. Once you have done so, you may put it up here in the basket, and you may sit quietly at your seat and wait for the bell to ring. Okay, so that would conclude the teaching of my lesson. It would wrap up everything we had been talking about for the last few weeks.